just got to put the date on it. This is, what's today?
August the 7th.
August the 7th, 1988. And Kathy and I are going to go down to Franklin and Preston, Idaho, and we want to know what we can see. And so my Uncle Grover's going to tell us.
Well, you'd
Something
like-
about our Thomas relatives.
Well, really, I can't. You want to know about the Thomases, not the Alstons.
Thomases, right?
The Thomases. And
But you'd like to know a little about Grandpa Thomas?
Grandpa Thomas, that's Seth Thomas,
Yeah.
my grandpa, and great-grandpa Thomas, my great-grandpa, which is Preston Thomas, and something about his life and that kind of stuff.
Have you ever seen any a pamphlet here on his life
Yeah, I did
You've
see
seen
that.
that.
Yeah,
when he was in Texas?
yeah.
Well, I might meander a little to begin with, but this is very difficult if I had notes. But just to
Well, just tell me some things about it. When did now when I talk, let's not talk about grandpas. Let's for today let's talk about names.
about what?
Names, like I'll name them, like Seth Thomas. He was my grandfather, right?
Yeah.
Now, when did he come up to Canada?
1896.
1896. And when did he marry Sadie?
1901.
And so he was, how old was he when he got up here? He must have been
He was born in 64, so he would have been 32.
32. And he was
When
30.
He married her 7 years later. No, 4 or 5. He'd been about 38.
38 when he
38.
married Sadie. How old was she?
18.
She was 18.
She wasn't 9. They were married in September, and she wasn't 19 until December.
Oh my gosh.
And I was born the next August. She was 19.
So you were born in what year?
1902.
1902.
Now, after he came to Canada, before he got married, didn't he go to Winnipeg for a winter to serve a mission?
He did. Between 96 and 1900, he served a mission in Winnipeg.
For 6 months.
All right, we'll start out and we'll try and...
Okay.
You know something? He's been filming you all the time.
Huh?
He's been filming you all the
I
time.
thought you had to have a light on the bloody thing. Have you been filming it? Well,
Yeah. Isn't that dang awful?
That is double crossing in the highest order.
What would you do different if he wasn't? What would you
Well, I wouldn't have
You
swore.
would.
Well, I'll ask you some
No,
questions.
but
Now, he went on a mission.
Any history that I might tell about. You see, Kelly, I'm not a master of the English language like you are, like you and Kathy, Bert.
Oh, no.
But I'd like to say this, that my mother and I were very close. I loved her very, very much. And as she grew older, we had many heart-to-heart talks, and I think she confided in me a lot of her feelings and a lot of the problems that she had. Of course, everybody has problems. But my father, as we said, Grandpa Thomas, Seth Thomas, came up to this country from Franklin in 1896. Well, the reason he came was because his oldest sister, Sarah Hyde, and her family, she had married a fellow by the name of Don Hyde. And his second oldest sister, Ella, had married John Nelson. And the Hydes settled south of Cardston on a homestead there. And the Nelsons settled out at Wolford, not on a homestead. It was land that the church had bought for colonization of church members. And
daughters.
In fact,
He
he
was
lived with her.
he was younger than those daughters, those sisters of his.
Oh, yeah, quite a bit, quite a bit. There was quite a family. There was Sarah and Ella, and
Now, are all these siblings of his all from the one wife of, which wife of Preston Thomas?
oh, well, we got to go back to Preston then for a minute. He had married first Jane Moorhead, called Aunt Jane, and it's a long story as far as he's concerned, because he come to North Carolina, and his ancestors came there in 1636,
Oh, I see.
and settled in Rockingham, North Carolina.
Was he the first one to join the church?
I don't know. But anyway, he joined the church there, and he had a brother that had moved to Texas, and he went to Texas to see him, to take the gospel to him. He was so enthused about it. Now he did go to Texas, and hence he had a lot of work done in Texas. He completed 5 missions there, but they were of a few months' duration, not for 2 years like the earlier. And somewhere along the line, he married Jane Moore. Then he traveled back and forth from St. Louis for some reason. I don't know. Some of my ancestors said he captained a what do you call them?
Steamboat?
Huh?
A steamboat? Or what?
No.
Group of pioneers crossing
Group
the
of
Platte.
pioneers.
Oh, I
Now
see.
this may be so, but I don't know for sure. But anyway, during one of these trips from St. Louis, he met Maria Hadlin, whose mother had joined the church, and she had a brother and a sister, and Maria had a brother and a sister, and her mother wanted them to go out to Utah, so they put them with this group, and Grandpa married her, and then again
That was that was his second wife.
that was his third wife. The second one, you see, I told you that I should have a few notes.
No.
On one of his friends in Texas, a very good friend, had a wife and a few kids, I don't know. But anyway, he died, and Grandpa Thomas married her, trying to look after her, like Brigham Young
Yep.
did. He had dozens of friends, and they each had a wife or two, and when they died, he married them to look after them. That
Yeah.
seemed to be the fashion. Now that's said in jest.
Yes, well, I understand.
Anyway, they lived in American Fork. That's where he first settled. And Aunt Jane, and this woman's name was Imogene, this second wife, the wife of his friend, whom he married to look at. And then he married Maria. Aunt Jane had a large family. The second wife had no children by Grandpa Thomas, great-grandpa Thomas, none at all. And they finally separated, the three of them. And but he lived in, when Brigham Young called him to go to Franklin to settle in Cache Valley, why, he had Aunt Jane and our great-grandmother, Maria. She was a little English woman. And she had a big family. And Aunt Jane had a big family, a large family.
And when you say family, is this a lot of kids? A lot of kids?
Grandpa Thomas?
Well, Aunt Jane and Maria, they had a lot of kids.
Oh
you
yeah,
say.
they had a whole bunch, about 18 between them.
Holy smokes, okay.
It's in the genealogical record
Yep.
there. Well, Brigham Young called him to go up there. At the same time, he called a fellow by the name of Rich, one of the Riches. It was 1860. And settled Cache Valley in Iowa. Idaho. Well, he got a half a mile across the Utah line, and he settled. That was Idaho, and that was as far as he wanted to go. So he settled. And today, when you go to Franklin, there's a big sign there that says the oldest town in Idaho. And Grandpa Thomas was the first bishop there. Pearl and I went to the museum on 2 or 3 occasions, and there on the wall, directly across from the entrance, so it was in a very prominent place, was a picture of Grandpa Thomas and Grandma Mariah. But nowhere was Aunt Jane. Now she, according to my father, she had held a very, very prominent place in the family. But no one seems to know why she wasn't given the publicity that Mariah was, our grandmother.
Now, now you say there's a museum in Franklin then?
Yeah.
Oh, well maybe we'll have to go see that when we're down there.
This Grandma Aunt Jane's, my father used to call her Aunt Jane, and her picture should have been with them in this museum, but it wasn't. It was just Mariah's. And I've tried to find out why the discrimination, but I've never been able to. Just last June, Earl and I went to Utah on Decoration Day, and we saw a big crowd of people there in the Franklin Cemetery. So we pulled in there, and there's flowers everywhere you do in the cemetery. Just out on the highway, right close to the Utah line, right close.
So it's south of Franklin.
South.
Okay.
South of Franklin. And it didn't take long for us to find their grave, and the grave says right on his headstone, first Bishop of Franklin. And Mariah Thomas, her grave is right beside his. She lived more than that. Well, anyway.
What about Aunt Jane? Hers there?
Huh?
Jane's there? Fine?
Jane is, I can't find anything about her. Don't know where she was buried, or what happened to her, or anything, but I don't know. I was standing just across the road from Grandpa's grave, great-grandpa, and I happened to see a headstone that said, Deborah Woodward Thomas Aiken. And there was a chap standing there, I'd never seen him before, and I said, well, that woman is my aunt by marriage. My wife and I have stopped in Franklin on 2 different occasions and visited with her. Now that's Aunt Dora Aiken. She was Uncle Pinckney Preston Thomas's first wife.
Oh, I see.
And for some reason they separated. They had one little girl that died when she was very small, and that's all the family they had. But it was very unusual, because this fellow that I was talking to said, why, she's my aunt by blood relation. So that was quite a coincidence. And he told me a fellow to go and see, the oldest fellow in Franklin, to go and see. I asked him about Aunt Jane. He told me this fellow. And you know, I didn't write his name down. His name's Woodard, but I can't think of his first name. But he's a man of past 80 years old. Now, if you go through Franklin, if you see someone, ask where a Woodard lives that's over 80 years old. There's a younger Woodard there that owns that big chicken business. It's $1 million chicken business. We were at his home, Earl and I, and Maurice and Susan, and he didn't seem to know too much. He was a young man.
Oh, I see.
But she was a Woodward. Well, this is kind of beside the point.
Well, that's interesting, though. That's good.
Well,
That's interesting.
but Uncle Preston come up to the country. He come about the year before my dad did. and he met Aunt Harriet Carter, who was up visiting Mrs. Elizabeth Harker, her sister in Cardston, and Uncle Pink met her, and they got married, their kids there was Bessie and Beth and Fielding and Glenn and Martha and Roberta.
Is Winifred
They're all
one of
from
them?
that union. What?
Is Winifred one of them? Oh, Winifred married.
Winifred?
Winifred Thomas married Fielding.
No.
Yeah,
She was
he wasn't Thomas,
she
she
was
an Albright. Winifred
she was a
Albright.
Newton.
Oh, she was a Newton?
She was
That's right.
Boyd Summerfeld's aunt.
That's right. That's right. That's why he always talks about Aunt Winnie.
And they
She
had
married
one
an
boy,
Albright.
Danny.
He died, and then she married Fielding.
They had one boy, Danny.
I
Yeah.
remember him.
Yep.
Her husband, she married an Aldrich,
Yes.
and he
Rex
died
Aldrich, I
and she
knew
married
him.
Fielding.
I see.
So that's that bunch. Well, Grandpa Thomas lived here. He went on a mission to Winnipeg. He and another elder, Elder North, opened the mission in Winnipeg. Now, how I know that, when they dedicated the new chapel in Winnipeg, about 25 years ago, Mrs. Reed, who had lived there,
Who's that?
Stan Reed's
Stan.
wife,
Oh, Stan Reed's wife.
they sent her a copy of the brochure, the pamphlet that they put out, its dedication, and I've got it here. And the first line said that when Elder Seth H. Thomas and Elder North, they arrived in Winnipeg at a certain time and opened the Winnipeg mission. Mind you, there'd been an Eastern Canadian mission,
Right.
but there hadn't been one in Winnipeg, so they have that distinction. And it said that was in the first paragraph in this
Yeah.
pamphlet that they had issued that we got used.
I didn't know that.
Well,
So who?
and he had also served a mission in the southern states.
Yeah.
There, when the mobbing was very, very bad.
I think I've
He
read a
served
journal on
under
that,
Elder-
haven't I?
Yeah.
He served under Elder B.H. Roberts, who was the mission president,
Oh yeah.
who had disguised himself as a tramp, and walking down the track to keep from. And they hung one young missionary.
Yeah.
When Grandpa was there. He had a lot of tough experiences. Anyway, he had lived with his mother, and he kind of looked after
This
her
is
and
Seth.
doted on her
And
until he was 38 years old. And then in 1900, Grandpa Alston, now on your maternal side, received a call at the recommendation of Ann Mercer, one of the oldest citizens of McGrath. He had recommended to the authorities that a few men around American Fork be called to come up and settle in southern Alberta. And the authorities recognized his recommendation and suggestion, and among them was Grandpa Halston. And Mother has a little genealogy book. I've got it here. These books, Bert's entitled to as much as I am, but I've got them. I'll will them to him when I croak, so he'll have them before long. Well, in this book, Mother makes a note and tells about it, about the call that her father got from the general authorities to move to Canada and take his daughters to be mothers in Israel and Zion and now in the new country of Alberta. And most of them settled in McGrath because that's where Mercer had settled. Now you've heard of the Mercers.
Yep, very common name.
Well, there was no work there. Your Grandma Thomas was about 18 years old, but there was an opening at the Wolf Hotel in Cardston for a waitress, and the Wolf Hotel was just back of where the Dominion Bank is, Toronto Dominion Bank.
oh yeah.
A little back and a little to the north. right in there. And it was a great big frame building and had porch all the way around. And, well, I remember it very well. It burned down in not
Yeah.
long after that. Well, anyway, Grandpa Thomas, he happened to see her, and he went off the deep end right now. And so did she. He at 38, she at 18. They were both very religious, and they wanted to be married for time and eternity. The church at that time had a ruling that was, as I understand it, that people could be sealed for time and eternity by general authorities and those in authority.
Outside the temple?
Outside the temple.
Outside the temple.
Come in.
Because the authority, they said, was greater than the place.
Right.
Well, it just happened that Apostle George Teasdale, who was appointed an apostle the same day, but second to Heber J. Grant, who became president for many, many years. You know, he succeeded Joseph Bush. And he came up here, and before that, he had married our Aunt Letty, Dad's youngest sister. Now, he was in his 60s, she was 22. So there was quite a bit of age differential there.
She was his fourth wife.
But after this didn't set good with any of the family, her marrying him. He had a wife and a grown family. And after we get done this here
No, you tell me now.
interrogation and confession,
You tell me
I will
now.
show you a letter where Grandpa wrote to Aunt Rose and expressed his feelings toward Apostle Teasdale.
Now this is
It was
Seth.
unfortunate.
Seth wrote to who? To Aunt Rose.
It's his sister.
Seth, your grandfather
Yeah.
wrote to Aunt Rose. Well, anyway, they were married. Now,
What year were they married? 19.
on September the 11th, 1901.
Okay.
And I'll grant this, there was no railroad then. Travel between McGrath and Carson was by horseback and buggy and wagon. But there was not one of Grandma's Sadie's folks there. Not one. Here she was, a little lone 18-year-old marrying a man just twice her age, practically. And not one of her folks. That same day, Apostle Teasdale married Lon Lamb, and Burke's full cousin, oldest cousin, from the Nelson family, Mamie Nelson. And they were married the same day for time and for eternity. The same way with your grandfather and your grandmother. Now, Grandpa Thomas, of course, had lived all his life with his mother. They got along fine. Well, he naturally assumed that in as much as he got along fine with Grandma. Now, I'm telling now some of Grandma Thomas's.
That's okay. Prejudices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's telling me how she felt. So he took her home to his mother's home.
And they lived in
to live
Wolford?
with them.
Wolford at the time?
How's that?
Where did they live at the time?
Carson.
They lived 1 block south of the temple.
Oh.
Just 1 block south of the southwest corner. Now the house has been torn down a long time ago. And that's where I was born. At that time there was no doctor in Carson, none at all. But Aunt Ella was a midwife. Now there's midwives that were registered and those that weren't.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether she was or not, but anyway, Mother said she was sick for 36 hours with me, and it was hot. The 10th of August, it was terribly hot. The poor little girl
that's when were you born?
Huh?
What?
10th of August.
10th of August.
What?
What? You were born 10th of August.
10th of August at 7 o'clock in the evening, 1902. Mother tells me this. Well, her and her mother-in-law, friction started right away. Stop that now, Alexa.
Okay, thank you for that. How are you? All that.
It's only, anyone can see that some friction would be kindled there, because Grandma Thomas, while she was a good little lady, she had her ways of doing things. And this young girl, a very attractive young girl, had come in and taken her the life and joy out of her life that had lived with her for 38 years. And now he had someone else instead of her, you see. And mother was very broad-minded about it, but it just got to where she said, I just told Seth that I wasn't going to stand it any longer. So he had some land out at Wolford, land that he had bought from the church, that they had bought for colonization. He bought a half section out just west of Lakeview, and just a half a mile north of his sister Ella's place. Now, they finished a nice little house out there, and my earliest recollections are in that house in Wolford. And it was 2-room with quite a large pantry and a kitchen. And Dad had a stable. He had a lot of corrals. He had about 100 head of cattle. He and Uncle Preston were in together, apparently, and he had a half section of land north of where he lived. Well, those are my earliest recollections. Now, shut that off now for a minute. No, what do you want to talk? Well, I started school in Wolford. Mr. Morrow was my school teacher. He was I guess he was a widower because he had a son, but there was no wife. And my friends, the kids that started with me was Jack Purnell. He became later a famous cowboy. He was in Herman Linder's class. He went to Australia to ride bucking horses. And there was Darrell Nelson, and he was my buddy, my full cousin, and we played together a lot of times. It was only half a mile apart. And there was Glover Purnell, and there was Rulon Lamb. He was a month or two older than I am. He's still alive and lives in Snook Lodge. And what is that fellow that had the started sturdy oil business?
Johansson.
Johansson.
Vivian
Glover,
Johansson.
Vivian Johansson. Now those were the kids that started beginners together. And well, Jack wasn't a beginner. Jack Purnell, he's about a year older or so. But anyway, they're all gone now. No, Rulon is still there. He outlived me by 10 years. Then they started farming wheat. Uncle Preston, he wasn't much for cowboying, but Dad was. He liked the cattle. They had unlimited range out east of where they lived with nobody. Well, clear till they got out to what they call the Eldridge Ranch. I guess it's the Barcade community. Anyway, Uncle Preston, he geared up his horses and broke up 30 acres and planted 30 acres of fall wheat, and it was that was new land, you know, and it produced terrifically. That's a good wheat country, huh? And but they couldn't get it thrashed, so they thought, well, we'll buy a thrash machine. And I remember when they got that. I remember when it come. I remember. I must have been 5, 6 years old. But I remember that thrash machine. Well, it cost a lot of money, and on for a couple of years, and they couldn't make the payments on the machine. He had to sell his cattle. They had to sell their cattle to make the payments. And they never recovered from that. Never did. Then he sold the land. Sold the land to a fellow by the name of Will Thompson, who was from Kansas and had settled in Spring Coulee. And I remember the couple he rented it to, a man and his wife. They come there, and we hadn't moved yet. And they come there and lived with the folks for a day or two until we got moved back to Carson. And Dad come out here. Instead of buying church land, which was the most of it, they had bought this land, the Cochran Ranch, for settlement. He bought some land from a private land dealer by the name of Chauncey Snow, C.E. Snow. Down there, that place, that half section where the Hooterites own it now, just east of Ray Mowers, that half section. He bought that.
The old Savage Quarter. The Savage Quarter, they call it?
Well, he had this quarter, that half first. That was sod. He broke that up, and then he lost that. And then they give him another chance because the old agent that come out from Ontario to look after their business here liked my dad. And so he gave him another chance, and he bought the Stinkweed Quarter and the Savage Quarter. But it was Savage after it was Thomas.
Yeah.
But instead of calling it the Thomas place, it was called the Savage Quarter.
Well, I can remember when Savage lived there.
Yeah. Well, and then the drought, 1918 and 19, never raised anything. Well, then they foreclosed again. And they had a lot of land. They had land to Thompson, where the Thompson colony is now.
Now, who's that had that land?
A lot of other land.
This land
And they
company.
foreclosed all of it.
Oh, I see.
And then Dad got this 80 acres down here. And then went to carpenter. He was a carpenter by trade. But in the meantime, his family had grown. He had a large family, and even in those times, a family took so much.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle. It was a real struggle. Well, you can shut that off now. Now what?
To the
Well,
middle
we lived
of
down on the
town.
farm down there, 3.5 miles. We had a buggy and a team. And let's see, that'd be about 1911, I'd be 9 or 10. And she had a baby every 2 years regular. I'll tell you, she sure bore out what they called her up here for, to be mother in Israel, mothers in Zion. Well, anyway, she was president of the Relief Society, and I used to drive the team. She had Letty and Grant, Jean. Letty was born in Cardston. Grant was born in Cardston. The house that he was born in went down the creek in the flood. Jean was born out to Wolford. Joe was born in Cardston. Not one of them in a hospital except your dad.
Yeah, just me.
Was the only
And I was the only one put on the bottle. That's why I'm little. The rest of them got titty dinner.
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Yeah, by the time Bert come along, poor old mother kind of dried up.
Yeah.
But he done all right. Anyway, she had about 3 or 4 little kids, so I used to drive her up to the Relief Society. Some days it'd be raining, and in the winter time, I don't ever remember bringing her up in the winter time. I think maybe some other reason. I used to ride to school on a horseback.
All the way up here to Glenwood?
Huh?
All the way up here to Glenwood?
Yeah, 2.5 miles. Ride on the horse. I used to meet Archie Shipley. He'd come down that mile, and we'd meet at that intersection there. And generally Archie and I would ride together at school. bishops in for 10, 15 years, and high councilman the same. He was a high councilman for many years, and would fill his assignments with a team in a buggy. He'd get up and leave home here and drive to Levitt in a team in a buggy or to Mountain View. Not very often, I don't think. But anyway, in 1910 we moved out there, and for the first couple of winters we moved back to Cardston for the winter, and then come out. In 1912 we moved to Glenwood to stay, and we lived in this house that right up here on the corner of the Doug Foxhall job. That was up where Willis and Louise lived, their place.
A little one, kitty corner from Dan's,
Called the
kind of.
Simmons house, what?
Kitty corner from Dan's, kind of.
Yeah. Just across, kitty corner from Dan's store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I say it was up where Willis and Louise live now, on that lot.
Oh, I see.
We lived there the first year or so. And then we moved down to where, just south of where Roger Smith is, right there in that house. Not that house.
Right.
Dad built a house there.
I can tell, that house is still standing though. You see, that Claire White eventually owned that house,
Yeah,
sold it to Reed Shields.
Yeah.
Both of them added on to it.
yeah.
And then when Alma Sommerfeld bought the house and had it moved to Cardston.
Right.
That's right.
And it's the house that Glenn Fisher owns today. I
That's
know where he
right.
lives.
Anyway, that's where he lived then for a long time. And then he bought that land back again and moved back down there. That half section. This old company, old man Campbell, he liked my dad. So he went back down there, and no use to make. He didn't have the equipment. He didn't have the equipment. He had a bunch of broomtails. I tell you what, he built the Reed Ranch house one summer, and I batched down there, and I borrowed 2 mules from Steve Hale, and we had 3 horses. And I had 5 horses on a sulky plow, and you should have 6. And Lord, what I went through that summer, I look back now, I was crazy. I'd have to be crazy to do it. Nobody in their right mind would put up with what I did.
How old were
The
you?
nearest water was a mile to the river, and I'd have to go at noon. I'd have to get on the broomtails bareback, sweaty, and take them to the river to water them. Oh, I was crazy. But anyway, stayed with it, and I broke 30 acres. And he planted that into wheat the next year, and I think he got around 50 bushels. It was new land. But still, the interest went on. You couldn't keep up with it, with what equipment. And at that time, they were breaking the land around the country with an old Avery steamer that Harkins owned. Imagine, it pulled 10 plows. Imagine that to the side of one sulky plow. The best you could do was 2 acres, 2 acres and a half a day. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. That's it. But, anyway, you set that off.
Papa, what do you remember about Grandma?
Oh, I was telling you about Mother.
Yeah.
You better turn it on again. She was president of the Relief Society. In her young, I can remember when she was young out at Wolford, she was and I was only little, but I have hazy sketches of seeing her in a home dramatic. And she must have been a knockout, because she was cute. And I remember that. She was very politically active. She was
a Democrat.
She was a Democrat.
That was her only fault.
And Dad was a
Republican.
Republican, and he figured, of course, the male of the species knew a lot more than the female. All he had to do was make a statement, and then she'd take it. But she didn't. And actually, Kelly, she used to snow him under. He was always very patient with her, but there were times when he got perturbed when he couldn't hold up to him. And anyway, she was president of the local conservatives here.
UFA.
Dad was liberal, so she must have been a conservative. And she was, and then she was prominent in the UFA political program in 1923 when they were elected. And then she quit that and joined the Social Creditors. And then the UFA were in from 23 to 35, and then the Social Creditors snowed them under. And this, so you can shut that off now.
Oh, go ahead, Aunt Pearl.
When I first met Grandma, of course, went down there quite a few times before Grover and I got married. I got acquainted with him. And she was a very intelligent person. I remember that I often wondered how come she knew so much, because there wasn't anything, any subject she couldn't talk about. And that was something new for me. Well, when Grover and I got married, she accepted me 100%. Always treated me real well. And I asked her one time how she knew so much about the Bible. She says, well, I love that book. I really love the Bible. And I asked her, well, did you know all much about it? And she said, well, I used to hold my baby when I nursed her. She had a rocker chair. Well, when you had that. And she said, I always read the Bible while I nursed the baby. And she could tell Bible stories that I never heard of before. And she was very apt. And now another thing, she was a very clever woman, inasmuch as they didn't always have everything that she needed to cook with and things like that. And I thought that she was very, very special. I couldn't understand how she could feed that great, big, long table with all those kids sitting around it besides her sister's kids that always used to play there. And
Now this was where? Here in Glenwood?
down there in the old house.
They had a great big long table, huh?
Yeah, they had 12 kids.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know that Grover was there at that time. But anyway, and they used to raise a good garden. She worked in the garden, and there wasn't anything she wouldn't do. And I remember this. I went there one time, and she had made hot biscuits, big ones, about not quite 4 inches across. And she put that big biscuit on a plate for every child, and then milk gravy. By the time they got that most of the Thomas, a lot of the Thomases haven't, like Burke and Grover. I don't know you that well, Kelly, but I think that you probably haven't too. And I used to get a big kick out of her jokes. My dad was a guy that told jokes too, and so I learned to really appreciate her jokes.
Were they always clean?
Oh, of course.
Oh, of course.
My
Yeah,
dad,
they were.
My dad wasn't though. He was a man. Oh no, she was very, very nice. She
Oh, that's
never,
good.
well, not to my knowledge, and I lived by her,
Mhm.
you know, always.
Yeah.
And she was always really, really good to me. She threatened me a few times.
Threatened you?
And she told me, she says, now, this is one thing I don't want you to do. Can I tell this? When Grover was born, Seth went to his own bed. Now, he was a good father. When she had a new baby in 2 years, he always took the little one, the biggest one, to bed with him and take care of it, while she had the little one with her. But she says, whatever you do, don't you let Grover go to his own bed. That's no kind of life. So I wouldn't let him.
Well, he'd been for 38 years, he'd been sleeping alone.
Yeah.
Besides, he didn't, with 12 kids to show for it, he didn't spend all his time.
I hope that's not on there.
Yeah, that's probably right.
But anyway, he was a good man. He was a very good man. He
Yes, he
attended Utah State University the first term it run.
Mhm.
In 1882 or something like that. But he studied, and he went to the BYU. It was called the Brigham Young Academy then. But he said, I studied the gospel. He says, I studied the Bible. That was his idea.
Yeah.
He has a diary here telling about his first mission getting ready and going to the south. Very, very, very interesting. It's not complete because somewhere along the line it got thrown away. But another thing that's not very complimentary, I guess it shouldn't go in any history, but it's a fact. There was only one way we could get to McGrath to visit was on the train. And Mother used to bundle us up, kids up from, as the years went by, they got more, and go to McGrath to visit Grandma Olson. We thought the world of her, that's her picture there. And, but my father never, to my knowledge, ever once went to McGrath to visit. They never did accept him. Never did. The Alston bunch. They never did. And Father never expressed himself as being bitter about it, although he hinted a time or two, and I knew that he was. And for a long, long time, even though with Mother extolling the virtues of the Alstons, I didn't altogether feel happy or comfortable with them. I don't yet. I really don't. But they never did accept him, never. And I certainly didn't appreciate
Yeah.
that. But he didn't. He never complained. He never.
Yeah.
But that was sad, It was sad. Of course, I guess they have their reason. But most of the time, he was very tolerant. He didn't complain too much. But he did take issue with Apostle Teasdale marrying his 22-year-old sister.
Yeah.
I I went to her home in 1923
Whose home?
24,
Whose home?
maybe both years, in Salt Lake.
Her
See,
home.
the old
Sadie?
apostle had
Hold on.
died,
Oh yeah.
and she married his son.
Oh
I
yeah.
told you about this.
That's right. Yeah.
And when I went there, they had 4 sons. And they treated me royal. Aunt Letty treated me royal. I was going to university.
Uh-huh.
And her husband was George Teasdale as well. He played trombone in an orchestra that played in a theater every night. You know, they had, though now they don't have that so much. But then he had a steady job playing the trombone. But he had 4 nice boys, and they sure treated me good.
So tell me
They weren't
this.
too active in the church, though, I could remember. I deduct since then. Later they moved to California, and I understand, I heard that she joined the Christian Science group.
Yeah.
I didn't know what they were.
Yeah,
You
they
hear that,
went to
Bert?
church, both of them, so I understand. This is what I understand.
Well, their father, that George Teasdale, that was the apostle, he was excommunicated from the church.
Yes.
For polygamy.
Was he?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
He had taken on too many wives after the 1890 manifesto,
Yeah.
and they didn't like that at all. So he was released from the church.
One of the 6, eh?
Yeah, I think there were 4.
Anyway,
Six.
that was,
Anyway, okay, now let's go back a little bit. Why did Seth come to Canada from Franklin? Why did he leave?
Now tell the truth, Grover.
what if some other people that are involved would get a hold of this?
Don't matter, tell the truth, it's true.
Now this is what you've heard, right? This is what you've heard of why they came up.
Oh, I guess his mother told him her.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but I think maybe you should censor it and cut this out or something.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll tell you what I have been told. Now it may not be right. It may. My dad hinted a few things to me. I said, "Your grandpa and mother." That's where I got most of the information.
From Sadie Ray.
Was that at the time, Uncle Preston, he was a kind of a what's that Spanish that chases women a lot? That Spanish guy, what's his name?
Romeo.
Huh?
Romeo.
Yeah.
Now this is Pinckney.
This
Yeah.
is Pinckney Preston. You
This
see,
is
his
Preston's
father was
son.
Preston Thomas. His son was Pinckney Preston
Mhm.
Thomas. Well, he didn't treat this first wife of his, Dora, Aunt Dora, didn't treat her very good. And of course, mothers side in with their sons, invariably, whether their son's right or wrong of my son, you know.
Yeah.
And she told us, Aunt Dora told Pearl and I, right in her home there in Franklin, she says, Pinckney and I would have made it. We would have got along fine if it hadn't have been for Grandma Thomas. She'd done so many things to them.
Which
She
grandma?
Says, for instance, huh?
Mariah.
Mariah?
Grandma Mariah.
Mariah, I'm talking about,
Okay.
yeah, his, he says,
Like your great man.
we needed a stove. Well, so she went and bought a new stove. She must have been the major domo in the whole family, you know, with her kids, because well, Grandpa was only 12. You see, when
Mhm.
or your grandfather Seth was only 12 when Grandpa Thomas was killed. So she ramrodded the whole family.
Yeah.
Well, she went and bought a new stove, and she looked at it. Well, she took the new stove and put it in her house and give them the old one. Now, Dora told us that. That was one thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, Preston, I guess, treated her pretty shabby. And the people in Franklin in those days, you know, they still had a vigilante spirit.
Mhm.
And the word went around that they were very unhappy with Pinckney, and that they were gonna, in those days, the punishment was tar and feather. And the rumor got around, and he left in a hurry. Now, if his kids would hear me say that on one of your tapes, they would,
Well, they'd get upset, and
this is
as
what
long
I
as
have
they-
been told.
Yeah.
This is what I was told.
now, so Pinckney, Seth, and Mariah came up to Canada.
Pinckney
And
got
the
out of
girls
there
too.
and left a year before they did,
Oh, I see.
because
There's
Is this
already
what you've
two
heard,
girls
Burke?
here. Pretty well, yeah. There's
And-
already two girls here.
Yes.
There's already two of the girls were already here.
yeah, Sarah and Ella.
Yeah.
Sarah and
Mariah
Dan.
comes
Dan
along.
was in. Dan, the youngest son, was in law school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, back in Michigan. Well, he come up, and he got out of there in a hurry. And Grandma Thomas was so upset with the people in Franklin, she says, "I'll just sell out and leave here." Well, Grandpa, being one of the first settlers there, had his pick of the land, and he had a half section of land. Well, I guess she must have sacrificed it as far as price went. But she sold out, and it took her a little while to sell out, and then she came up here. But apparently she was quite well to do, even up
Uh-huh.
to the time she died.
Now, you said Preston was killed.
Uh,
You said Preston